really look at them.
Oh, I know, my gosh.
Yeah.
Yesterday was yesterday was kind of a train wreck. I was going great guns with all this stuff, and it was all going to be out by by 7:30 or 8 or something like this. And then I got a call from my kid that my ex had reneged on. Well, anyway, this is not really appropriate for YouTube. But anyway, it ended up that I needed to drop everything I was doing and drive my kid to Natick. So,
oh, wow.
So
that's not short.
Yeah. So when I got home at 10:30 or whatever it was after his thing, there was no juice left in the tank, and I've been at it, unfortunately, straight from 7 o'clock this morning. So the fact that I got it out when I did was actually I was pretty happy that I got it out at all. Otherwise, I would have just had to do it. But it doesn't really matter in the sense of needing to. We didn't really need to read that ahead of time. That really is more for people's interest. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, please feel free to do so. But it's not critical because it's more of a sort of historical reconstruction of the rationale for kashrut, rather than a something specific about the practice of kashrut. Okay, and although it does link it to sustainability in a way that has always been, from my perspective, has always been a part of kashrut. What is, in the 20th century and 21st century is called eco-kashrut. But I think that, the fact that we have to now add eco as a prefix to kashrut, suggesting that kashrut on its own is not ecologically sound, points to sort of developments in the general culture and in Jewish culture that, are perhaps lamentable. But because I do think that part of the point of kashrut, in as much as we can identify a point to it, right, does have to do with living within the environment that we have been given, and making a sustainable food culture.
Is there anything of the same sort about the Nile and Egyptian foods? I'm just curious now.
I don't know, but that's actually one of the most interesting aspects of Jewish foodways, right? Is that although Jews and Arabs and pretty much everyone in the Middle East, right, is very focused on hospitality and lots of food, right? That the fact that in Israel, right, the land of Israel is a place that relies on rain during the rainy season for sustenance, right? It's why if you've been to worship and study or other fairly traditional, I don't think this is done in the Reform movement, but in more traditional Jewish settings on Pesach and on Shmini Atzeret, right? It's the Pesach in the spring, Shmini Atzeret in the fall, right? We pray Davka for rain in the fall, right? Because we need the rain during the rainy season in the land of Israel to survive, and we pray for dew in the spring because we can't make it through the dry season if we don't have dew, right? So these are, we've talked about this in the past in this session, but this is real, right? Whereas in Egypt, right, the Nile just irrigates everything.
Except now.
Well, right. I mean, and that is like,
it's going to kill people. It really could.
It's one of those things about about climate change that is really scary, right? Yeah. Go ahead, Helen.
I was going to say, when I was in Israel, I learned that the first day of rain is a school holiday.
Oh,
Oh,
that's great.
that sounds like snow in New England.
Yeah,
There they have a rain day, but it's a real celebration.
it's
right?
a celebration.
As opposed to a snow day, all the kids celebrate, but
Right.
all the parents and
Yeah.
teachers don't celebrate, right? It's a hassle. Oh, it's another day at the end of the school year, and blah, blah. Anyway, all right. So, but
Ethiopia is shutting off the Nile.
yes, right,
Oh,
yeah, and right, human intervention in the environment, right? Whether it's extremely intentional, as with what's happening in Ethiopia, or sort of a byproduct of less intentional interventions, right? Such as the ozone or global warming, all that stuff, right? So those are perhaps larger issues, but just to know that when we talk about kashrut, right, and that I think people get a little freaked out often about kashrut because it feels like, oh my gosh, it's so complicated and there's so many rules, right? And then in the from a historical perspective, right, the reformers, right, both in this country and in Germany, right, said, the real point of kashrut, right, is to separate Jews from other people. Like, aren't we over that already, right? And we
Like
don't
circumcision.
be engaged in kitchen Judaism, right? Aren't there more lofty spiritual aspects that we should be focusing on, right? And from an Orthodox perspective, right, or from let's not go to orthodoxy, let's just say, from a more traditional perspective, one of the distinctive features of Judaism, right, is that it is not solely concerned with lofty spiritual matters, right? It's very heavily engaged with what our Rabbi Arthur Waskow calls down-to-earth issues, right? So Judaism has something to say about all kinds of things, right? Actually, let me put the dog down for a minute, and I'm gonna go get. I'll go get the book that I was going to show you.
yeah.
Yeah, today was such a day that I never managed to make it out of my house. I so many meetings on Zoom this morning that I just got to the point where I realized that the 3-minute trip to CCB was going to be impossible. So anyway, this is Arthur Waskow's book called Down to Earth Judaism. It's not a new book, I don't think. Let me see. I mean,
who is he?
It's from 1995. Arthur Waskow is a renewal rabbi, very politically active. This book, is 25 years old, but he's, Arthur Waskow is still active in a lot of human rights causes. He wrote a book called Seasons of Our Joy, which I heartily recommend in terms of the holiday celebrations. I don't know if it was him or someone else. He tells you, someone in that Jewish renewal movement will tell you should make your own shofar, right?
Wow.
Obtain an untreated ram's horn and then do this, that, and the other thing in order to make it into
Everybody has just hanging out in their yard. Which
He's over the
just
hill.
hanging out in their yard.
Yeah, right. Of course, because we all have sheep, So, yeah, exactly. So, but anyway, so this is about food, money, sex, and the rest of life, right? So Judaism has something, and there's the apocryphal story. Maybe it's not apocryphal because it's a Jewish story, so it might actually be true, right? That one morning, the great rabbi woke up, went out to use the privy, and he came back and he noticed a pair of feet underneath his bed, and he tapped on the feet and woke up his one of his disciples and says, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, I needed to learn at the feet of the master about how it's supposed to go at night. I don't know what to do with a wife, so I had to come and see what you do."
That's a riot.
So go ahead, Helen. Oh no, that's just background noise. Okay. All right. So yeah.
Jim,
So go ahead, Lori.
I really did enjoy this story, the whole concept of eco-kashrut and one of its predecessors, ethical kashrut, having to do with how animals are raised and slaughtered and so forth. And that becomes somewhat more compelling and easier to digest, I would guess, literally or figuratively, than Leviticus telling you this, but not that, but not this, and no crawling things unless they have jointed limbs. And not all of that fits in with what is sustainable and ecological.
Well, right. But I think I think that the issue always is, right, that, and I, with my sort of the kind of training that I had, it was not reform, but it also wasn't orthodox, right? So everything in Judaism, right, that has a Torah-itic foundation, right, and not everything does, right? There's nothing about a Passover Seder, right, in the Torah. There's nothing about Hanukkah in the Torah, right? It's not as though everything comes.
Not true.
What?
I've been reading up on the three sons, and they're all in the prayers.
Oh, absolutely. So, right,
Yeah.
the Haggadah of Pesach, right, draws on elements of the Torah. All I'm saying is that the custom of a Seder, right, is not known to the authors of the Torah, right? They didn't have a Seder, right? That didn't start until Second Temple or post Second Temple.
Okay.
Right. And so, but where there is a Torah-itic foundation, right, it is important, right, to know what that is, right? Mm-hmm. And I think what I really enjoyed about David, I forget his last name, but his take on it, right, is that if we do enough sort of thinking about what's in the Torah, right, we can understand it as already being towards this ethical, sort of in this sort of ethical, environmental, sustainable kind of a thing, right? This notion, right, that, that you can't have a fight, right, for, and we have this problem today, as he points out, right? Why would we set up a system where we have to pit animals, right, livestock versus people, right, for food, right? If we've got a huge amount of agricultural surplus, fine, right? But in an environment where we don't have that, right, let the animals that we do cultivate and eat, let them be the ones that can live and thrive in that environment, right? And so I think so yes, I agree with you, right?
There's another piece too. The way we're doing the agricultural industrial farming, right, is harming our soil. It's also not producing nutritious food.
Right.
Because you have, the reason why we have so much cholesterol buildup and all of these issues with our health is because our meat consumption, even if you get kosher meat, if it's not grown sustainably, it has too many omega-3 sixes and not enough omega-3s.
Right. Exactly.
So the nutrition, and then it also ruins the soil composition because the soil has to have rest, and they don't do rest. And our system of taxation doesn't allow you to put your land in, if you don't grow it every year, you're not allowed to have it put in use for
Right.
tax purposes. So we have an unsustainable system of food production, nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a retired farmer, so I'm getting, my blood
The
rate.
real thing.
So
Yes.
I was
assume
thinking
that-
about Africa and how they are, in a sense, eating up their future. And it's terrifying.
Everywhere,
Yeah,
everywhere, Brazil,
it's
everywhere.
so many places that are engaged in this. But I'm going to pull us back from this global thing, as important as it is, and but I'm going to pull us back just because I think, as I said, one of the things about kashrut, right, is that it feels like, oh my God, it's endlessly complicated, right? The other thing is that, that's only crazy Orthodox people who are, who are worried about all these sort of non-spiritual issues, right? They're getting bogged down in this minutia, right? And it can't be spiritual, right? And then, and then also just like that, it can just be, it somehow feels, right, that even though everybody, right, has a food ethic, right, they may not necessarily be aware of it, but everyone has a food ethic, right? Everyone has foods they will eat and foods they won't eat. And a lot of that has to do obviously with taste, but also a lot of it has to do with ideology, right? People have reasons why they eat this and not that, right? So, but somehow kashrut isn't seen, right, as being, on a spectrum, say with vegetarianism or pescatarianism or cannibalism or whatever, right? It's it's seen, because it's religious, right? It somehow must be irrational, right? As though eating eating oysters but not eating organ meat, right, is a perfectly rational set of decisions, right? So anyway, so those three things I think are kind of get in the way of kashrut. And so, what I wanted to do today was just sort of run through from the Torah's perspective, right? What is it that we do and do not eat, right? And be clear, right, that it's what's really important, right, is that with everything in Judaism that does have a Torah-itic component, right, the Torah is not going to give us all the answers, right? And that much of the system that we've inherited, right, is based on the rabbis, but also very largely based on customs, either at the community level or at the family level.
Yeah.
Right? And so one of the things that, modernity has sort of taken away from us, right, is the kind of mimetic traditions, right, that families used to inherit from the people that were older than they were, right? The classic story about kashrut, right, is about the brisket, right? In order to make the brisket kosher, right? You got to cut this end and cut that end, right? and then
Oh,
finally,
God.
right? Finally, someone says, Grandma, why do we cut the ends off the brisket? And she's, I did it to make it fit in the pan. I don't know why you do it.
That's funny, Rabbi Jim. I heard that story
never
once
heard
about a
that.
ham, about doing it to ham.
You see these, this is not just a Jewish story, right? The Gentiles also struggle with
It's sustaining
right, sustaining traditions, right? And sometimes we sustain traditions that, is it really that? Do we really need to throw away the brisket? No, God forbid, it's so expensive. But anyway, but so that but we have lost a lot of those mimetic traditions, right? And I think that we often sort of just put kashrut aside, right, as something that is not relevant to us, right? And so what I want, sort of one of the assignments, I think, for a bar, a bat mitzvah, right, someone who is going to be in this mode, right, is to think about, well, what does kashrut really mean, right, for them, right? Which is not to say like you have to keep kosher, right? And I don't even know what it means, right, to say to someone you need to keep kosher. Now, what I do say to people when they are converting to Judaism, right, I'll say to them, just so you can sort of live in this mode, for a month, right, do a sort of a basic form of kashrut, right? Don't eat any pork or shellfish, and try not to mix meat and milk in the same meal, right? And do that for a month, right? Just to see how it goes, right? And it's always very interesting to hear people's responses, first of all, about how hard it is, right? Even just to do that very often, right? Because it's a level of mindfulness about our food, right? That we've generally, whatever it is that we eat, right? We're generally just not that mindful, right? And one of the problems with our modern food culture, right, is that there are so many things now, like Passover, right? One of the big points of Passover, I think we talked about this, right? One of the big points of Passover, to my mind, right, is it's like kashrut on steroids, right? It makes you hyper aware of what you're eating for 1 week a year, right? You've got to be unbelievably mindful. But now you can go to the butchery and get all the foods that you eat the rest of the year just in their Passover form. So like, is that really the point, right? Is that really the point? So I can have, anyway, go ahead, Ellen.
So it's no pork, no shellfish, and not mixing dairy with meat?
Right.
Yes.
Dairy with meat.
Right. If I had to sort of identify, what are the absolutely core components of kashrut, I would probably say it's those, right? And I can say that though, right, because by and large in this country, right, we don't tend to eat animals that have died randomly, and we don't eat roadkill, right? Whereas in the ancient world, right, if an animal has died, right, and it's still warm, right, meaning it's still good, right, people would eat it because it's good food. You don't throw it away, right?
But you don't mix meat with dairy? You don't mix meat with dairy?
You don't mix meat with dairy, right?
Jim, there are exceptions in this country too.
I'm
In Maine,
sure.
for example, there is something called the deer list, DEER.
Yes.
Right.
And if a deer is struck by a car, which happens very often at certain times of year,
Imagine.
when your name comes up on the list, the animal warden calls you and you get a deer.
There we go.
Or
It used to be
raccoon or
different.
whatever.
Yeah.
Years ago, because I was in an accident which killed a deer and left a fawn without a mother. We were in the car, and I don't remember, but some official group came to the crash, and they had to call someone in the local tribes, and the tribes that's how we found out that the tribes would get any animal that was killed of that kind.
Interesting. So maybe it's different jurisdictions.
Yeah, this was in Idaho.
Anyway, but that for instance is a very important part of kashrut, right? Most people that I'm talking to are not hunters, right? Hunting has never been a big part of Jewish tradition, right? It's not that there are no Jewish hunters. My brother-in-law loves hunting, and he loves to eat what he catches, but it's not sort of a standard Jewish practice, right? We both Esau and Ishmael, right, are the hunters, whereas Jacob and Isaac, the ones that we draw our our lineage from, those tend to be the more domesticated men, so shall we speak, so to speak.
So if this distinction of not eating pork and shellfish and not mixing dairy with meat is important, and I have no problem agreeing that it's important, and I'm not being disrespectful with this next question, with all this impossible meat and soy bacon and so forth, there's the letter of the law and then there's the intent.
Well,
you have a fake ham and cheese sandwich somehow feels as wrong as I use wrong in quotes.
Yeah.
As eating a ham and cheese sandwich.
Well, it's a great question, Lori, and it's actually for me it's an actual question, right? Because one of the trade-offs that I've made in terms of having a kosher kitchen now in my home, right, which I never had when I was married, right? One of the deals that I made with my kid, who's a major carnivore, right, is that we have to eat every kind of fake meat that it comes across the transom, right? So we have to try every brand. And so now I have started eating cheeseburgers again. Now, before I was Jewish, cheeseburgers were among my favorite ever foods, right? And so what does it mean, right, to eat a cheeseburger now? And is it kosher, right, in that sort of larger sense that you're talking about, Lori?
The ethical sense.
Right? And the answer that I've come up with is that yes, it is kosher, right? And the reason it's kosher, right, is because of the sort of what I would go back to is ultimately, right, all the rules of kashrut come down to mindful intentionality, right? It's not, I don't think, right, so much about the specifics of what you put in your mouth. Like I have rabbinic colleagues who eat all foods, right? Pork, shellfish, and real cheeseburgers. And I have rabbinic colleagues who are much stricter than I am. But all of them have sort of an intentionality about their diet, right? That is what really is crucial. First, then Heba. Oh.
I have something that I'd like to add to this conversation.
Wait 1 second, Heba. We're going to go to Kent and then to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've been vegetarian for most of my life, and most of the Jews that I've hung out with are hippie Jewish people who are all vegetarians because it's easier that way. And we've always eaten very intentionally, like my whole life. But I was getting to the new kind of burgers, the not burgers things that have come out. I actually enjoy the taste of them. But for me, the ethical point is they come in so much plastic packaging. And then I go to the grocery store and they have supposedly free range organic eggs, but they're wrapped in like 3 sheets of plastic.
Yes, I know. Yes.
And so for me, the ethical choices that I've come to in this middle stage of my life are, I try to go local to farm stands. We pick all our stuff in the summer, and even getting the local eggs, and not plastic packaging. If I can buy anything in glass or tin cans or paper, that's because there's no issue about me not eating shellfish or not eating meat and cheese together or whatever, because that doesn't really happen in my life. But so where do I go from there? Now my ethical dilemma with these new burgers is they taste delicious, but you know, a lot of communities aren't even recycling anymore because China doesn't want our recycling. So it just goes into the dump. Even if they take your bin,
Right.
in the end, it all ends up in the same dump. So
I do have a resource for you, and I'll even, since I'm home, I'll get it out of my freezer.
Kent, I've been really concerned about that too. And
Yes,
feeling like
me
there's
too.
no plastic recycling, but I've been looking at the state website, recyclesmart.ma, and I guess there is more plastic recycling going on than I thought.
well, I know that the town of Winthrop was forced to admit that they take our bins, they still have us separate everything, but they put it all in the same dump. And I found out a lot of towns started doing that
Well,
because
they have to
I'm
because
gonna
there's
pull
state
it
law.
back and just sort of, so if you like the fake meat, I prefer this Beyond Meat because it's not soy.
yeah, that's what I've been buying, but it
And
comes in.
you can get these packages of 10, which are packaged in there's a cardboard on the outside and then a plastic bag on the inside rather than the hard plastic. So
I'll look for those.
Because I was
I
going
would like to find out where you get eggs that are not from a store and therefore not wrapped in layers of plastic.
Yeah, well, I do a lot of farming around like Concord and Wayland and Lincoln. And so there's a lot of local farm stands that I just happen to drive by. Also, I go to Vermont a lot where they have local eggs. So whenever I'm in the country and I'm passing stands, I grab them up because they're fantastic.
yeah, so I'm gonna pull us. I'm gonna pull us back, and so
I'll
I
mute.
just want to say something.
Oh, right,
because
Eva. Yeah,
I think
right.
it's
Sorry.
important. I went years ago to a nutritionist because I was having problems with my health. And he diagnosed that I should stay away from chicken and I should stay away from anything lactose. So, and that if I do eat any beef, it should be at minimal amounts, and that I really should be eating turkey and bison.
Yeah, that I've read.
And so, you know, there is a nutritional piece with the composition of your body.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in my case, there's no milk products in my house.
Right.
So that wouldn't be an issue. And a vegetarian diet is not healthy for me.
Right. Right. But there's also, I mean, there's all right. So so not everyone can be a vegetarian, and nor should everyone be a vegetarian. If it works for you, great.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, right? There are ethical and healthy.
There's also nutritional pieces for the composition of the way your body is made.
Exactly. Right. And the Torah makes it clear, right, that there is in Genesis, right, this sort of idea, right, that humans should be vegetarian, right? But it is very, very quickly acknowledged that, you know, many humans cannot live without meat, right? And so that is just a reality. It's also, but what I also thought was interesting, right, when I get this, I don't know now if this is just from that guy David or also from Rabbi Waskow, but that, you know, we Jews, you know, or the Israelites, right, we're not eating a lot of chicken. They were not eating a lot of beef, right? What did they eat? Right, by and large, they ate goat and lamb, right?
Which I'm supposed to eat as well.
Right, but you know, we by and large in our food system, right? There's you know, you can get goat, you can get lamb, but at least the lamb at the butchery is really expensive. So,
yes.
You know, so
it's expensive everywhere. I go to a farm up in New Hampshire, and it's very expensive there as well.
Exactly. So, you know, it's, you know, and I think also, as Eva has already said, right, with factory farming, right, food is very cheap, which makes, you know, really healthy and sustainable food often is prohibitively expensive, given the way we've structured our economy. All right, so
can I add just one note about that expensive, healthy, and sustainable food? It's so much more satisfying people who eat that factory farm food, they never feel satisfied. I'm sure that contributes to obesity in the US. When we eat high quality food, we're satisfied and it doesn't take as much.
Except money.
Well, right, but I think
We're not
what
paying our
I'm saying is-
people, we're not paying our people enough anyway. A
right,
minimum wage should be between $26 and $30 an hour to have the same purchasing power as 1960. So we're totally, I mean, we're producing cheap food so that we can keep people full, but not necessarily really take care of them.
So I do want to get back to, you know, as you can tell, right, as soon as you begin to discuss kashrut, right, it's very difficult not to move to discussions of sustainability, right, of economics, of ethics, right. All of this stuff is, and I think that that's often what's lost when we just think about kashrut as opposed to actually engage with it, right? And so I do want to go back and I want to put it. I'm going. I'll share the screen with you, and we'll just look at Deuteronomy and get a sense a little bit of what. That's not the screen I want to share. It's not what I wanted.
I really appreciate your point, Rabbi Jim, that the main thing is mindfulness about food.
It's so crucial, I believe, right, to really understand what you're eating and why you're eating it, and it, you know, which is not in any way from my perspective that I have an opinion about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat. I mean, I might, but it's not really legitimate for me to share that with you, except for, you know, maybe in sort of broad ethical terms, you know. And also, like, you know, don't eat roadkill. I mean, maybe the deer, like if you run into a deer, you can take that and slaughter it, fine. But no, I really do think, right, that mindfulness is of the essence. And I say that, right, because in Deuteronomy, right, we have this very interesting set of juxtapositions. So if you see on the screen, right, ye are the children, right, of the Lord your God. Banim atem ladonai Elohechem, right? So you are the children of God, right? Which, you know, is one of those things that you see in the Torah from time to time, sort of reminding us humans, right? In this case, right, a subset of humans, the Jews, right, that there is some element of the divine in us, and that leaves us with some responsibilities, right? And of course, each tradition is going to define those responsibilities differently, but our tradition says, right, ye shall not cut yourselves, right, nor make any baldness between your eyes for the dead.
Could you explain that part?
Yeah.
So basically, it's probably this is an anthropological thing, right? That probably some of the surrounding people had mourning customs that involved, you know, self-flagellation or self-injury, right, as an expression of grief, and that could take the form, right, of cutting flesh, right, to, you know, sort of I mean, we see it today, right?
Yes.
And, you know, unfortunately, right, especially among kids, right, that, you know, kids who have unbearable, you know, sort of psychic pain will actually sometimes cut themselves, right, to have a physical manifestation of that psychic pain, right? So that it, along those lines, right, that the Torah says that's not such a good thing to do. Like, don't do that, right?
But clothing is torn
Right.
for death.
And so, right. So in later tradition, I don't remember exactly, Ellen, where that tradition starts.
Yeah.
Right? But you can imagine, right, that cutting or tearing your clothing as opposed to cutting or tearing your skin or your hair, right? You know, people are, you know, we have that expression, tearing your hair out, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, hopefully we can keep that figurative, right? And not literal, right? So I think that's what that's talking about, right? And why? For thou art a holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord has chosen thee to be his own treasure out of all peoples that are on the face of the earth. All right, a verse that gives people all kinds of trouble, right? Namely the Jews, right? Because people who are not Jewish will point to this verse and say, look, the Jews think they're better than everybody else, right?
Yeah.
So not such, so a challenging verse. Go ahead, Ellen.
What does lambda aleph mean? La.
Where are you looking?
Right after the gimel.
Lo, that means low. Do not, that means don't or no.
No, it means no.
Lo is the word for no. It's also, in this case, lo tochal is an imperative, so it's a negative imperative. So don't eat.
What is the word for yes?
Ken.
What?
Ken.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And so part, right, of having this relationship with God, right, and that's the way I think about chosenness, right, is that, I think about chosenness in the way that I think about, say, my kids, right, that I have obviously different relationships with my kids, right? They're different people, right? But I don't have a exclusive relationship with one son to the exclusion of the other son, right? They are both my chosen son, right? And
That's nice.
but that chosenness, right, consists of different things, right? Moses loves food, and so we spend a lot of time talking about food, cooking food, and eating food, right? Samson loves cars, so even though I'm not as into cars as I am into food, right, we spend a lot of time talking about cars, in the garage, looking at cars, stopping at cars along the road and talking about why this one is good, right? So I mean, each kid has different things he needs, and each kid, I hope, gets some of those things from me. That doesn't mean that I have an exclusive kind of relationship with either, right? And but those relationships, right, entail some amount of responsibility, right? They entail some amount of what it takes to keep the connection ongoing, right? And I would say, right, that one of the reasons that Jews care about food so much, right, is because they understand how crucial it is, right, to relationships. And so there are certain things you shall eat and certain abominable things, toeva, right, a very complicated word, toeva, those things you shall not eat, right? So it sets up, right, that's the eating of certain foods, right, will sort of get in the way of your relationship with God. Now, of course, the Torah is going to come up with, all kinds of categories, right? And then Deuteronomy is going to have a slightly different list than what's in Leviticus, right? And then like some things that are in Leviticus, like, wait, we can eat locusts? I thought we weren't supposed to eat anything that was like an insect, right? How does that work? Right? So obviously we're not going to take the lists here in the Torah, right, as being a clear guide to what we should and should not eat, right? That's for us to work out, right? That's for us to work out on our own. And ask ourselves that question, right? Like for Heva, it's pretty clear, right? If Heva eats lactose, right, that's not good for her body, right? And it interferes, maybe not in a spiritual way, but certainly in a physical way, right, of her sort of connection with the world, with God, with whatever, right? But I think that that food has such an emotional component, right? That there are certain things that when we eat them, right? And for each person, it's going to be, in a slightly different, that sort of has a tendency to disconnect us from ourselves or from God or from other people, right? And it could be, for some people, right? People who have food addictions, right? People who have, who use alcohol, right? All kinds of stuff, right? Can lead to a sort of a estrangement, right? And so here are the ones, right? This is what you can eat, right? So don't eat the thing, right? That is a toeva, right? But that toeva, right, is a very slippery concept, right? A very slippery category, right? Certain things are toeva in the Torah, right? They might not be so much of a toeva today, right? Okay. So Zod habehima, right? This is the beast that you should eat, that you will eat, right? You may eat is how it's translated here, right? The ox or the cow, right? The sheep, right? And the goat. The hart, right? A hart is a deer, right? Gazelle, another kind of a roebuck, another kind of deer. The wild goat and the peaguard. I don't know what a peaguard is.
I have to look that one up
Yeah,
because I've never heard of it.
Heard of a peaguard. And the antelope and the mountain sheep. Okay, so basically, right, and so this is interesting, right? They give you here a list of animals, a list of species that are kosher, right? And then they tell you the general rule, right? What is the general rule? The general rule, right, is that every beast that parteth the hoof, right, and hath the whole hoof wholly cloven in two, and cheweth the cud among the beasts, those you may eat, right? So you need a cloven hoof, and you need the cud, right? Right. So if they only chew the cud, or if they only have the cloven hoof, but they don't chew the cud, right? So you don't eat a camel. Thank God. They did not look.
I wouldn't be that close to one.
I've been close enough to one to really no. Not that they smell that much worse than a cow or a goat, but
They spit.
that they do too. That they do, but that's not a category. And an animal that spits, it's not that
No, that's why I wouldn't want to be close to them.
Oh, definitely. And the hair, right? The hair is an interesting one, right? The hair, they say the hair chews the cud, right? But it doesn't have a cloven hoof, right? Clearly, the hair doesn't chew the cud, right? But it has that sort of. So that was the explanation I understand, right? It sort of has it's constantly, constantly gnawing. And the rock badger, because they chew the cud, but part not the hoof, and they are unclean to you, right? The hair doesn't have any hooves, so it's not even in the category. So.
What is a rock badger?
That delectable rabbit at the French restaurant is not kosher. I mean, for me, it might be kosher for you, but it's not kosher for me.
Well, if you're talking about the sustainability business, and I've never had rabbit that I'm aware of, most of the suburbs are overrun by rabbits, and it's destroying they're destroying people's gardens.
Well, tell me where the rabbits are. I'll bring Rosie and she'll eat them up.
You can come
Where the Harvard pool is.
You can come anywhere. So you'd kind of think that these real ecologically minded people would say, look, we need to thin the number of rabbits who are destroying the vegetation and who are competing with other animals for food. And so let's have a rabbit feast.
Right. And so there's right then now there's where you sort of run into the limits, right, of rational explanations for the mitzvahs, right? Is that there is, right, there is a way in which, sure, you can make that argument, and that's a fine argument to make, and I'm happy to have people eat the rabbits. I just don't, as a rabbi, I don't want to sponsor it through the synagogue, right?
I gotcha.
It's right. It's just not part of. It's not part of the Jewish food way, right, to have these things. And again, that's what that, but it's important that you bring that up, right, Lori, because that's a lot of what kashrut is, right, is also Jewish foodways, right? What do we eat as Jews, right? And that's what's so interesting about the Jewish world, right, being so diverse and so international, right? The range of Jewish foodways is, we can get fooled in this country, right? Especially, before the conservative movement decided that everyone was Sephardi, right? That the only kind of Jewish food was Eastern European, sort of Ashkenazi, potatoes and boiled meat, right?
And chicken soup.
And chicken soup, right. Not realizing the unbelievable array of Jewish foods throughout the world. All right, but the swine, right, the chazir, right, the chazer the chazer is a unique in Jewish, sort of like there's nothing good about the chazer, right? And there are Jews, right, like the Jews that live at CCB, right, who have a kitchen, right, that would never serve pork, right, but they'll have shrimp cocktail for Shabbos dinner. It's like and all of this sort of like complaints about the reform movement in the 19th century, right? They were breaking the dietary laws, blah 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 blah, right? Well, the Treifa banquet, which was a big celebration in Cincinnati when they graduated the first class of rabbis from Hebrew Union College, right? They invited all the Jews. They came, and there were shellfish this and shellfish that, and lobster thermidor, right? But there weren't any baby back ribs, right? It was bad enough, right? It was bad enough they were eating all that seafood, and in Cincinnati, nonetheless, right? But the point is that that even that which seems so treif, right? Treif is the word for torn, right? Meaning non-kosher, is and like quite literally, what Lori was describing, the deer that's hit by a car is literally treif, right? Meaning killed not by kosher slaughter, but by some other means of being killed. All right, so the swine, because he parteth the hoof, but cheweth not the cud, he is unclean unto you. Of their flesh ye shall not eat, in their carcass ye shall not touch. These you may eat of all that are in the waters, right? And here they're not going to bother with species for whatever reason, right? But they're going to say whatever has fins and scales, right? And one of the things that you'll notice, right? All of these things, right? And we'll actually, I'm going to save this for a moment. Of all clean birds, whatever hath not fins and scales, ye shall not eat it. It is unclean to you. All right. So what about monkfish that doesn't have scales? Well, I don't eat it. Catfish doesn't have scales. I don't eat it. Swordfish that has scales when it's young and then loses its scales when it's an adult. But of course, we eat the adult swordfish. That I do eat. Right. So all of these categories, right, are going to be, they're going to depend on the person. Right. Eel, which was one of my absolute favorite things at the sushi bar. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Before I became Jewish, right? Oh, wait, it has fins, no scales. Okay, I guess I can't eat eel anymore, right? So that one I did take out of my diet. I can't take out swordfish for whatever reason. I don't know. It's too much a part of my.
Catch it young.
Exactly. Well, it had it. They used to have scales. It just they fell
That's
out.
right. That's right.
Right. All right. Of clean birds ye may eat, but these of they which ye shall not eat: the great vulture, the bearded vulture, the osprey, and the gled, and the falcon, and the kite after its kinds, and the raven after its kinds, and the ostrich, and the nighthawk, and the seamew, and the hawk after its kinds, the little owl, and the great owl, and the horned owl, and the pelican, and the carrion vulture, and the cormorant, and the stork, and the heron after its kinds, and the hoopoe, and the bat. All right. So those are all the ones you can eat, implying that there are a bunch that you can. Right? So what is the characteristic that that makes all of these similar?
They're carnivores.
Yes, they're all carnivores. So when it comes down to it, right? Oh, Eva, you're muted.
As having been, I mean, I couldn't eat chicken, but I had chicken
Yeah.
as in my farm. All birds that I have ever met are omnivores.
Yeah. Right. And so
Yeah.
right. And that's what's really interesting, right? But remember, right, as you know, I can't speak too much, right, for the Torah, right? But the way things did end up developing, right, is that the functional result of this, right, was two, right? The first one, right, is that by and large, everything that we are allowed to eat is not a carnivore, right? Or at least, and this is the second piece, right? Or at least it is possible to make it such that they are not a carnivore, right? So, so you'll notice probably if you buy a package of nicely shrink wrapped kosher chicken or meat, right? You might see on that colorful label, vegetarian feed.
Vegetarian what?
Feed.
Feed.
You'll see that on non-kosher chicken too.
Well, because lo and behold, kosher chicken has certain aspects of kashrut, like the idea that we prefer to eat animals that don't eat other animals, right? For whatever reason, right? And we can come up with
So then again, I get right back to my original statement a while ago. Those chicken are not healthy.
No.
Because a healthy chicken is an omnivore.
Right. So
if they're not eating bugs and they're not eating baby mice and they're not eating whatever.
What it means, Heva, is not bugs. I don't think that it means bugs. I think what it means is other chickens, right? Other,
But they do eat. They'll eat mice.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean,
They
again.
do?
Oh yeah.
Then I need to get some chickens in my basement.
Borrow them.
Yeah. Anyways, I can let you borrow Rosie. She'll try to chase down the
And
mice.
they are very quick. They'll catch mice.
They love mice.
Really?
Yeah.
If they can
Boy, this bat mitzvah training is really something.
if she can get both of my dogs, if they can get their paws on a rodent, that's it. That's lunch.
Oh, God.
And it is remarkable.
That's what they were bred for.
It's remarkable how large of a rodent can go down their gullets. I'm always amazed that when they catch one and I say drop that, and instead they eat it, and it's like, oh.
I had a barn cat that would hunt rabbit.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I had a cat that would bring rabbits home.
Yeah.
Would share them with us. Oh, it was so generous of her. Half a rabbit.
I had a cat that did things like that.
Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, so again, now Heva is raising, I think, very important points, right? I'm sure that and all of this stuff, right? I don't want to put too fine a point on it, right? Because a lot of animals, right, when presented with food, right, are not necessarily going to make the distinction, right, between if something is in their feed, right, they'll probably just eat it, right?
Yep.
Right. So put too fine a point on it. I think that the point is not the purity of this distinction, but the idea behind it, right? That by and large, we look for domesticated animals, right, that are not violent. Right? That's what we want to put into our bodies. Now, anyone that's seen a turkey in Brookline knows that turkeys can be violent, but
Turkeys can be vicious.
Yeah, turkeys can be very mean, especially if you're a car. Yeah. But anyway, so again, not to put too much of a fine point on it, but that kashrut really does have, and also like part of it is also right that that part of kashrut, again, as it's developed, right, is to make meat a little bit hard, right? Right, meat should cost more money, right? You shouldn't just eat meat at the same rate that you eat vegetables, right? You know, even if you need to eat meat, right, it shouldn't be that you necessarily eat meat and nothing else, right? We're not carnivores, right? Humans can be omnivores, but we're not carnivores. So I think that's the other piece of it. All right, so the question I'll leave you with, right, and I would love to sort of just hear about this a little bit next week before we move on to the next topic, right, is I'm not going to say, you know, keep kosher, you know, for the sake of this, but just do think about, well, what is my current food ethic, right? What constitutes kashrut for me? Because kosher means fit, right? It means fit or appropriate to eat, right? And that's why we can say, is it kosher for me to come over and do this, right? Is it appropriate for me to come over and do it, right? So as regards your food ethic, what constitutes kashrut? And it doesn't have to be any sort of a traditional Jewish form of kashrut if that's not your bag, but
Who is that?
But I would just say, right, that anyone who's Jewish, right, it behooves us as a Jew who's taking responsibility for our spiritual life, right,
Who is it?
to include a food ethic in that category. So, all right. So with that, we'll close and we'll turn our attention over to Parable Hebrew. So I think some of our folks will say goodbye. Bye, Lori. Thank you.
No, I have a question first.
Oh, right.
One of the things that I've had a great deal of interest in is the difference between kashrut and the Muslim dietary traditions, some of which are the same,
Yeah.
and some of which are very different.
Very different.
There's no pork, but yes, there's shellfish.
And you can mix meat and milk.
A Muslim, as a matter of fact, one of the choicest holiday meals involves, is it lamb? Is it veal? I don't know, something cooked in milk specifically.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
But it's okay, it's permissible if you can't find halal meat or chicken to buy kosher food. But I don't believe it works the other way.
That's a machloket. I have friends who keep kosher, who come from Arab lands or at least lands where Islam is dominant, and they eat halal meat.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, that's interesting to know. Thank you.
I think if you went to the VOD,
I'm not doing that.
Right. I think if you go to the VOD, the VOD is the rabbinic board here in Boston. It decides whether something is kosher or not. If you ask the rabbis on the VOD, can I eat halal meat? They're going to say, what? No way. Right. But there are Jews definitely who eat halal meat. And
I didn't know that. Thanks. Well, so I'm going to depart now.
I think it's fine, but that again, I'm not the most strict rabbi. Hi, Mallory. How are you? You guys got to run. I can't hear you. Mallory, you're muted.
See you at later
make
today.
See you tonight.
I'll try for next time,
Get
Rabbi.
some rest and food.
See you, Mallory.
Before.
Okay, bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
All right. So we will continue with Prayer Book Hebrew if you have the energy for it. You'll have to remind me, are we on page?
Grab my book.
We did chapter 7 last time. Are people
No,
ready?
we didn't. We weren't quite up to 7 yet.
We weren't. Okay.
I'm still kind of stuck on 7.
Got it. Okay. Great. Oh, well, we did the vocabulary for 7 last week. That's what I remember. Okay. So, Mayim, what's your question about 7?
Oh, I'm just finding all these masculine, feminine, plural, and singular forms very difficult.
Yes.
And then all the possessive endings, but I'm consoling myself that I'm not attempting to speak proper Hebrew. So I just want to get the main ideas.
Right. The main thing here, right, and I don't think I could possibly actually repeat this sufficiently, right? The main thing here is for you to acquire passive knowledge, right, of these things. The book asks you to produce them. I think on the understanding that if you can produce them in an active way, that means that your passive reception of them will be enhanced, right? But I would argue that it doesn't necessarily make sense for you to really overwhelm yourself, right, with that expectation. I think you'll see that by and large the possessive endings that come up are become pretty obvious pretty soon. It's the third person singular masculine, right? It's the first person. It's the 2 second person masculines, right, that come up the most, right? And so if you've got those, you're doing pretty well, and the ones that come up less frequently, they show up and you're like, oh my God, what's that? I have to look at the translation, darn it. And then it's the main thing, right, which is what you see. I think what I want to just draw your attention to, right, is on pages 54 and 55, right, you have these charts, right? And remember, it says something very important at the bottom of page 55. You do not need to memorize all the changes that take place when nouns have possessive endings attached. You only need to recognize the nouns and their various possessive endings, right? So don't get too hung up, right? I mean, if memorization is your thing, go for it, but it would be a lot of work. What's really important here, right, is that each word has the way that it's spelled, right, absent the suffixes, right, and then it has what the book here calls the base form, right, which is how it's spelled with the suffixes, right? And again, you do not need to memorize those, right? But every once in a while, they'll be sufficiently different that it might be a little confusing, like with Av, right, with father, right? All right. Great. And then, okay. Right, and then if it has a hey at the end, this is on page 56. Right, the hey, when you add a right. Oh, this is about definite endings. Definite, yeah. So if it right, so the possessive ending replaces the hey of the definite article. Right. So that will also be like Habat Hatova, right? You see it in the middle of the page, the good daughter. But you don't need the hey if it's BT. Right? So the difference between the daughter is good and the good daughter, right, is that when the predicate, when the adjective is a predicate, right, it doesn't need the hey at the beginning. When the adjective is modifying, is a modifier of a noun, like the good daughter, as opposed to the daughter is good, you do add the hey there.
You mean the hey at the beginning, the one before daughter?
Exactly. No, the one before Tova.
Hatova. Hatova. Oh. But they both are Hatova.
Right. So the first one, right, all definite nouns used with adjectives, right? The adjective has a hey attached to the definite noun and the adjective together form a phrase, right? Habat Hatova, right? The good daughter. Iti Hatova, my good daughter, right? But if the adjective, right, the definite noun form a sentence, right, then the adjective becomes a predicate, right? Habat Tova, the daughter is good. Again, I don't think you need to worry about it that much. I don't think this is a big deal. What I would say is like really the things to focus on are to so like what you can kind of tell what's really important by looking at the excerpts from the prayer book they put in. Right. So look at page 60. Right. After the Shema. Right. Echad Eloheinu. Right. Gadol Adonenu. Kadosh Shemo. Right. So one is our God. Great is our Lord. Right. Holy is his name. Right. So Ellen, I can't hear you. Ellen, you're still muted.
What page are we on?
Page 60.
60?
All right, so I'm happy to go on with the vocabulary for chapter 8, or I'm happy also to answer or try to answer questions if you're
Yeah, a little bit of I haven't quite wrapped my head around what they mean by participles. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, absolutely. All right, so
but I liked getting that Zoker. They use the word Zoker, remembering, because then we have that book of remembrance. It's like, oh right, I get that.
Yeah. You're beginning to put it all together. Roots are super important in Hebrew, right? And on one hand, right, recognizing the root really gives you a heads up in terms of what the word's going to mean, and also, right, it can also sometimes be a false friend, right? Because you'll say, oh, I know what that word means because it has this root, and then it turns out it's it's a variation on that root, right? it's not quite what you thought it was. But a lot of them, but when it comes to Zocher or Zachor, right, or Yizker, right, all from the same root to remember, right? All of those roots, all of those forms are important. So just to sort of start off, right, that all the words in this vocabulary list on page 62, all of the words here are participles. They are all.
Can you pronounce them?
I will. All of them are masculine singular participles. And the thing to remember about participles, right, is that they are a verbal noun, right?
Oh,
Technically, right? A
okay.
participle is a verbal noun, right? It's a noun formed from a verb,
Thank you. That helps.
right? And I don't know if they mention that here, but it's important to know that, right? Because even though participles in Hebrew stand in for the present tense, right? The reason they do is because there is no real present tense in Hebrew, right? So you have to kind of imagine
Oh.
an is loving, right?
Mm.
So if you say, I love you, ani ohev otach, right? If I were to say that, when I used to say that to my ex-wife, right? Ani ohev otach, right? It means I love you, right? But if I were to translate it super literally, I am loving you,
Mm.
right? Okay, so ohev is love, loving. Omer is saying. Boré is creating.
Could you say that again?
Boré. So you know that word boré. Boré peri hagafen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Holech is to go or to walk, right? And you might know this root from halacha, right?
Mhm.
Halacha is the Jewish way of going. Ahava is the word for love. You learned ahava in an earlier chapter. Okay. Zocher, we've already talked about. Zocher is remembering. Yotzer is forming or shaping, often used as a synonym in biblical poetry, along with boré. Right? So boré and yotzer are two of the ways we think about how God acts in the world. Notain is giving.
How do you say, could you say that again?
Notain, which is where we get the word Natan, right? The name Natan, right? A gift or a giver. And then Ose, right? Doing or making. So Ose Shalom, right?
Mhm.
God Ose Shalom. God is the one who makes peace. Right?
Well, I think of Dayenu, Notan Lanu, who made the world. Thank you.
Natan Lanu, right? Natan Lanu et Torato, who gave us, right? But that is actually a past tense, Mayim. Natan.
Oh, okay.
Right. But it is actually you're raising a very interesting point, right? Is that Jewish liturgy loves participles, right? In part because they are continuous.
Mm.
Right? And so God, in the Jewish God, right? Very often, the God in much of as much as you can say normative Jewish theology, right, tends not to do things once. Right? God is always doing stuff. Right?
Mhm.
So Mechadesh B'tuvo Kol Yom Ma'aseh V'Reshit, right? The one who is forever renewing
Mm.
the acts of creation. Right? So God does that every day, repeatedly. So I don't know if that means that God just does it once a day, or God does it every day, repeated times every day.
Could you say going again and walking? Could you do that one again?
Olech.
Olay?
Olech.
Olay.
Ho, like ho, 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 right? Ho, and then lech. Lech.
Olay.
There you go. Good. All right. So what it says here, right? If participles, no, the participle is not a verb. Anyway. It's an adjective. It's a verbal noun. Right. So in linguistic terms, right, a noun and an adjective is a form of noun. Anything that's not, anything that's not a verb is a noun. All right.
Well, thank you. Just saying it's a verbal noun, that was the piece I needed to
Right.
make sense of that.
Great. Wonderful. Right. So as it's actually in this book, we will usually translate Hebrew participles with the English form ing, right? Which in English, we tend to call them gerunds, right? But it's fine. There are alternative translations, but sometimes awkward translations are just fine, right? It reminds you that that you're actually reading a translation and not a text in English. So participles in the prayer book, you'll see participles spelled without the O at the beginning.
Mhm,
Right? So you'll see at the top of page 63,
mhm,
right, that Zocher and Zocher, those are the same.
mhm.
In the Bible, right, because the Bible is obviously the Bible is an ancient text, spelling is not always standard, right? And one of the ways that it's actually remarkable how standard spelling is in the Torah, right? I mean, think of English, right? English didn't have standard spelling, until much, much later than Hebrew. But there is a difference between it's called Haser or Malay, right? The Malay means that the O is there, and Haser means the O is not there, right? And then so for these forms of the standard form of the participle, you add a taf at the end, right? And you have those three dot ones, which I can never remember the name of them. I apologize. And you can see how much these look like nouns, especially when you see that their formation, right, is like an adjective or a noun, right? The masculine gets the im, plural ending, and the feminine gets the ot, plural ending. And remember that the participle follows the grammatical gender of the noun, right, that it's modifying. It doesn't follow the form, right? So if there's a masculine noun with what is usually a feminine ending, right? Don't get confused, right? When you see something that looks like a masculine, nashim is a good example. Nashim is the plural of isha, of woman. Nashim is women. So the nashim zochrot, right? So even though the ending is im, the ending of the participle will be ot, right? The women are remembering. Does that make sense, Mayim, or am I just confusing you?
No, it does. So the form of the particle, it's like, if it's the teacher says, it depends if it's a masculine or feminine teacher or plural of teachers. Okay.
But there's no tenses, right? It's used, right? It's used as the present tense, right? Because the present tense, simple present tense verb like is or are or am is understood, right? But you can use these participles. You'll often see Rabbi Hillel haya omer, right? Rabbi Hillel used to say, right? And but the form is the same. All right, so you can see on 64 they give you some examples. All right, so let's look at what we've got. All right, so all this stuff is helpful in terms of understanding the prayer book. So here's on page 71. Osei Shalom Bimromav. You probably all know this, right? Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, V'al Kol Yisrael, the Imaru Amen, right? The one who makes, right? The one who makes peace in the heights or in his heights, up there with God, right? Make it also on us and on all Israel. These days we tend to include V'al kol yoshvei tevel, right? Which is to say, and also upon everybody who lives on earth. And say Amen. Right? So one thing to know is that when someone is reading the Kaddish and you hear the words V'imru Amen, what are you supposed to say?
Amen.
Amen, right? Because they're telling you say Amen already, right? So in general, when you're at services, whenever you hear someone say Amen, the polite thing to do is to say Amen, right? Amen means so be it, right? So if someone came late at the Kiddush and makes the Kiddush after everyone else has made Kiddush, everyone who hears that person should say Amen.
I don't know how you get Imuru out of Omer, but
You'll learn eventually that is an imperative.
oh,
Okay. And the way that, and you actually had one, sometimes, actually, no, that's not an imperative. The one that we had before was a second person plural future. Lo tochlu, these you shall not eat, right? I mistakenly said that was an imperative.
okay.
But actually, negative imperatives add second person prefix. So it actually is technically it's an imperative, but it doesn't have the imperative form. The imperative form. So the imperative of the first that would be tomru, right? Tomru. You will say, but you don't use the taf in a positive imperative, so that's why it's imru. Imru, and you will say, right? And say, go say it already.
And the va there is like and, right?
Right. And just remember when you're translating from Hebrew, that biblical and prayer book Hebrew love the. So if you put in every single and, right? Oh my gosh, it would be the worst prose ever, right? And, right? Which is completely fine in Hebrew and completely not fine in English.
Okay.
All right. So, and then the second one is also this is one of the really lovely blessings. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. You know all that, right? Yotzer, right? Who shapes, right? Or forms or makes, or right? Uvorei choshech, and makes light and dark. Shapes light and creates darkness. Oseh shalom, makes peace. Uvorei et. What is hakol?
Everything.
Everything, right? So what's interesting about this verse, right, is it's actually a verse, I believe, from the Yotzer Ora Uvorei Choshech Oseh Shalom Uvorei Et Hara is the way they have it in the Bible. I think it's in Isaiah. I don't remember it entirely. Does anyone remember what Ra is?
Oh, evil.
Evil, right? So the rabbis realize, davening in the morning, we don't want to necessarily emphasize the fact that God is both the creator of good and bad, right? So let's say hakol, just to kind of soften it a bit, right? But in its original biblical context, right, it's an argument against dualism, right? The idea that there are equal and opposing forces in the world, right? There's not two gods, not the good God and the bad God, right? There is a single God who is responsible for everything, which leaves us with all kinds of other questions, like the Book of Job, right? But preferable in the Jewish mind to having multiple gods.
So in this prayer, Rabbi, where it's Otzer, or he
Yep.
shapes the light or forms the light,
Yep.
and then Uvore
Choshech.
Hosha, that's create. That's that
And create.
Bore, that comes from Bore.
Yeah, it's okay. So good point. This is Bore, right? But when the bet is one of several letters that, if I think I may have mentioned this, mem is another one, and fe is the other one. If you put a vav before those letters, right? It's an old pronunciation rule, right? That for whatever reason, you can't have a v before a bet. You can't say vabet. You have to turn the vet into an u, and it becomes uvore.
Well, V and B are very related when you try to say them.
Well, they absolutely are, and I think that's
Abraham.
right. And so the other reason, right, is that you don't actually the dagesh that would be in the dagesh that would be in the bet disappears when you put the vav in front of it, right? And so you would have to say vavet, right, if you were going to say it v. And so there's a transformation from the v sound to the u sound.
So is that a vu vore, or is it an
uvore? Uvore.
Ooh.
And you'll see that all over the place.
Okay.
And there are a few exceptions, which I always find to be very interesting, right? There's a line in the High Holiday Liturgy, which is something vapachad, right? And it should technically be u fachad, right? Fear, something in fear. But I remember, so they're rare enough that I actually remember when I see them, because it's, it's pretty consistent, right? So uvore choshech, right? Ose shalom, uvore et hakol. And there I find it just fascinating, right? That the two things on the quote unquote positive side, right, get yotzer and oseh, right? And the things that are, say, on the negative side, or the also side, right, light and dark, peace and peace, light and peace is one side, right? Darkness and evil are the other side, right? That bure, right, is by and large a really positive word, right? Bereshit is the first word of the Bible, right? And so I think that this is a very important Jewish concept, right? That even things that we might think of as scary or even bad, right, are created by God, right? And ultimately, we can't describe them as being wholly evil, right? Which is a very challenging concept, right? Because we always want to make exceptions. Well, what about mosquitoes, right? And then there's humans, right? There are humans that we can't see how any human, that we can't see how there's certain humans that we can't imagine had anything but evil to do in the world, right? But as a general rule, right, anything that might seem scary or bad is also created, right? It's also God's creation, and we have to struggle with that.
I don't know about the rest of you folks, but I'm learning a lot of Hebrew from Stiesel, right? You know, Stiesel.
I've heard it's great. I've heard it's a great teaching. I still haven't seen it.
Well, there's an Uncle Nahum who often says, "Oh, those evil people."
Ah, oh, interesting.
And it must be some common phrase in Hebrew, like, you know, like
Yeah, I don't know that
it
phrase.
says all the time, like, damn those evil people.
Wow. That's awesome.
It's a great show.
I've
I'm
heard
glad that
it.
they added another season.
Yeah, I've heard that it's awesome. Yeah, no,
Oh, it is.
I'm not really allowed to watch anything. I don't watch television by myself, but by and large, I just don't have time. And all of my watching time is controlled by my child. So we only seem to watch superhero sort of thing.
How old is your child?
17.
Well, they might love Stiesel. It's really great.
He would love it if I could get him to watch it.
Yeah.
But he has, it's not so much that he would refuse to watch it, it's that he has an agenda. You know, we have a backlog of things that he needs me to see for me to understand him. And like, okay, good.
Yeah.
I had
It's
to draw
great that
the
you
line.
had that opportunity to spend time with him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I basically decided that my social life and non-work responsible time is basically devoted to him until he goes to college, and then
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Maybe see you on Zoom.